Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. As climate, social inequity, and sustainability become the key issues of this age, regulators have understood that businesses must be measured not just on metrics such as profitability and share price, but also by environmental impact, contribution to the solution of social problems, and corporate governance. If companies are to be considered corporate citizens, then environmental, social, and governance or ESG considerations are the key. Various Indian corporations have committed to this ideal, but the evolution of ESG regulations in India is at a nascent stage. What lies ahead for ESG in India?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show Yashika Singh. Yashika was Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs, Communication and Sustainability and Responsibility at Pernod Ricard India at the time of the recording, but has since moved on. Yashika has more than 2 decades of experience in public policy, corporate affairs, economic analysis, and corporate strategy. She was responsible for managing government affairs and public policy, corporate reputation, sustainability, and CSR, and was part of the executive committee leadership team for Pernod Ricard India. Yashika has been country director at Spaceside, a public policy and corporate affairs consulting firm. Earlier, she was the lead for corporate relations, strategy, and economics for Rio Tinto India and head of economic analysis, research, and advisory at Dun and Bradstreet India. Formerly trained as an economist, Yashika started her career at the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation and subsequently worked at the Center for Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. Additionally, Yashika has been part of various high-powered committees, including at the Reserve Bank of India. Welcome, Yashika.
Hi, Ashraf. Thank you so much for having me on. Looking forward to this conversation.
You're very welcome. Yeah, so am I actually. And actually, this is quite a sort of a buzzword nowadays, Yashika. So my first question is this: ESG and CSR are often confused or used interchangeably, but they aren't quite the same. Could you explain the difference?
Yeah, it's one of my sort of pet peeves personally. Every time people sort of use them interchangeably, if you were to sort of try and break this down in a short format, it would be CSR is corporate social responsibility. I think most of us know this, right? It's more self-regulation by the business. It's sort of aimed at really, defending and protecting the society and protect and nurture the environment, particularly around where the business has a footprint. So a lot of CSR is driven by internal self-regulation. It's driven by looking at where the impact of business footprint is and then looking to sort of, minimize that impact, right? And many companies have been doing CSR for ages. There are some great companies in India, Indian companies that have had a very strong ethos of social responsibility, right? Even before the laws came around it and it became mandatory and all the reporting around it was needed. Indian companies have had a very strong ethos of social responsibility.
The Tatas come to mind, actually.
Yes, I agree. And that's the one name that comes to all our minds, right? But there are, and they have sort of Tatas and Birlas, setting up schools in sort of being involved in nation building in a certain way. But ESG is sort of driven more by the investor community, if I may say so. And it's ESG really stands for environment, social, and governance. And those three pillars really need to work together and bring about a way of doing business that's responsible and ethical and ensures that ethical business practices are being followed with particular attention to social, environmental, economic development and governance practices, right? And it really allowed for companies to look at, for organizations to look at the risks and opportunities both that were coming about by changes in environmental, economic and social systems. But also there is a fair amount of reporting requirement around ESG, okay? So it is more external driven, which is good, I think. So what it does is that it almost crystallizes the expectations of various stakeholders and holds companies accountable, right? And it is geared towards creating long-term value for all the stakeholders, but also builds in accountability, responsibility, and also certain, let's say, carrots for companies who have a good record in ESG, right? So that's how I see the two as being different, right? Bit more internal, bit more external driven. And the CSR is going to be, driven by each company CSR is going to be driven by where their impact lies. ESG will be driven by broader concepts, right? And I'm not saying one cannot take over the other. And the reason they are often confused is because there's a lot of commonality, right? We could be doing environment under CSR. We could be working with communities under CSR, which is the social factor. And then there's the governance bit and how boards are run, etc. So that's how I distinguish between them.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important distinction. But Yashika, how is ESG important to India?
Very important. I think, there are, so as I said in ESG, the term itself it starts with environment. And I think, India is facing, not just India, the world is facing significant environmental challenges, air, water pollution, deforestation. I think we're also seeing the brunt of climate change. There are a whole host of studies which have sort of pointed out how India could be on the losing side of climate change as we go forward and as we put into place, if we don't put into place various mitigation measures. As far as the government is concerned, the Indian Prime Minister has also made commitments to net zero emissions by 2070 under the UN Climate Change Conference. So all of these, what I mean by bringing up these various factors is that it automatically requires a wide spectrum of action to be taken by government, by civil society, and by the business to deal with many of these issues, right? So, air quality, I think I live in Gurgaon and close to New Delhi, and it's really unfortunate that New Delhi becomes, has been named as one of the capitals with the worst air quality in the world, right? Not just air, but our waterways have become polluted. And 70% of surface water is estimated to be unfit for consumption. And as much as 40 million liters of wastewater enters rivers, right? And so all these are huge challenges, right? And they require, like I said, an action across the board. And these are the environmental challenges, and then there are the social challenges, right? The right to livelihood or getting livelihood, poverty, getting food, all of that is where the communities are. And as we sort of go along the path of economic development, and we do want to do that, I don't think there's any doubt around it. Whatever may be the model of economic development that India works out, whether it's investment driven or consumption driven, in both cases there will be impact on the communities and society. Right? So I think all these factors need to have various actors in the society to come together. Finally, on the governance bit, right? The regulatory system in India can be quite Byzantine at times, and it is geared towards having control measures in place, which is fantastic. But also it therefore requires that the governance processes within companies are very, very strong. And that's one of the ways of mitigating regulatory risk when you work in a country like India, which has high levels of regulation and oversight. So all of this, if you put that together, it becomes apparent why the corporate sector or the, let's say, I don't even want to use the word corporate, but let's say the business or the economic activity or the sector that drives economic activity, whatever be the nature of it, needs to take on some of these responsibilities, because we are an important element of the economic ecosystem. And that's why ESG becomes important for us, right?
And how would you chart the evolution of the ESG space in India?
Look, I think I'm going to sound a bit of a wet blanket, but I don't mean to. It's a journey, right? It's a transformation. It is not something that we are at the end of the journey, but it's a transformation. But on the positive side, there's a lot of potential, right? And as we just spoke about why it's critical, and, consumers and civil society and all the rest of it are reminding us. And there are various sectors, FMCG, automobile, my own sector, alcohol, the alcohol sector, as we call it, alcohol beverage sector, I should use the full form, are increasingly becoming cognizant of their ESG performance, right? Now, listed companies are required by law to report on ESG metrics, and therefore they will get down that path, right? When you put in place a system where you're required by the regulator to do it, it's a good thing. Then, once you are required to report, you are required to do. But there are various startups as well who are incorporating ESG practices. There are companies who are not even listed who have been reporting using the various formats available. And I think all these sort of different pressures, whether it's communities, consumers, customers, civil society, government regulations, all of this are very quickly pushing us down that pathway where ESG will evolve very, very quickly from here on. And I think different people are at different points on the journey. Not all of us are at the same place, and it is also dependent on the size of the business and the impact that you have. But broadly speaking, yes, we're on the path, let's say, right? And there's a long way to go.
Now, how are ESG investments growing in India? Do you have a sense of the numbers also, or at least sort of a broad overview that you can give us?
Yeah, I think so. They have gained significant impetus in India in recent years, right? Corporates understand. I just mentioned this. I'm repeating myself here, but corporates understand the risks and opportunities presented by climate change. I think there is enough companies out there who are trying to gain from providing solutions which are green oriented. So there is that, and there is opportunities there, and all of that. The fact that there are companies who are going out of the way to build businesses around solutions which help us deal with the environment, social aspect of it, ensures that there is attractiveness associated with investing, right? And ESG investments emerge as a breakout theme in 2022, right? With clean energy and electric vehicle investments leading the way. I mean, understandably, right? That's where a lot of our focus is: clean energy and electric vehicle, and it was nearly $7.9 billion in 2022. So, and to me, the number where it is today is as important as where it could be, right? So, I just to quote, the Standard Chartered Sustainable Banking Report, that has stated that India has a high potential for growth in sustainable investing, and with the ability to mobilize as much as $1 trillion towards top ESG priorities, right? Especially for financing climate transition by 2030. And overall, 8.2 trillion of investable retail wealth could be channeled into sustainable investments. Those are large numbers, right? And so I suppose the important thing is also like what has been the number, but where could it go? And I think that's really important to bear in mind, that this is an opportunity which needs to be translated, and it needs to be translated from both sides, because when the banking reports happen, they are looking at the potential, and as much as the money is out there to be pushed into these investments, somebody will have to make viable options that this money can find its way into, because we're talking about trillions of dollars over the next 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think an important part of that ecosystem, of course, is the regulations. Now, I think we can all agree that regulations in India, as far as ESG is concerned, are at a nascent stage. What do you think could be the next steps as far as the regulatory landscape is concerned?
Yeah, but they are at a nascent stage, and that's completely fine. Often regulation follows innovation, right? So this is being able to invest, using ESG as a parameter for investment, and then building around that is a relatively, I suppose it's not that new. It's been around for a decade now, but to that extent, it's growing in India, right? And the regulation will have to catch up. And I think regulation usually catches up either when there is an opportunity which needs to be harnessed, which in this case we know there is, right? Or there is a risk that this opportunity that is there to be harnessed could be misused, in which case regulatory sort of solutions and unlocking takes place, right? You see, the good news is the government of India is very much focused on the net zero carbon economy and towards green industrial and economic transition. So it's very much focused around that, and it's also very much focused around growth and development. And if those two things are together, that there should be growth and development, but it should be in a manner that it is contributing to the net zero carbon commitments, then I think that's a fertile area for unlocks to take place, right? I keep saying challenges. I think you put challenges in my mind, but what I mean is that it's a fertile ground for regulatory unlocks to take place, and there'll be people like us who'd be advocating. Now, where could it really happen, right? There could be a few, let's say, low-lying fruits when it comes to regulatory unlocks. One could be, the ESG rating framework. There are multiple ESG rating frameworks that are currently approved by SEBI, right? But there is no standardized one across the spectrum. Now, if you have a standardized ESG framework, which will also rate bond issuers on different parameters, and then you can really watch out whether their sustainability claims stand up, right? And that would restore investor confidence in the green investment sector. And I think that's critical, right? So having these, while there are rating frameworks, but bringing them into one place and sort of ratifying them that, yes, this is how we are looking at it. You can trust this broad issuer. Yes, you can stand behind these sustainability claims. I think that will go a long way, right, in sort of promoting the opportunity. The other one is technological intervention, I suppose, or promoting that, or ensuring that, if not promoting it, ensuring that there are no sort of rules and regulations that come in the way. Look, data is a big part of this whole ESG economy, right? Because, companies have also had to move away from just stating commitments to showing action. And action is shown through data. And therefore, a lot of the ESG space really means that bringing together disparate data sets, right? I remember in one of my previous roles when I was brought in to do ESG reporting, and the nightmare bit was sort of collating all the data and putting it into framework and formats, right? And technology could be a massive role. It could play a massive role in addressing these challenges, right? And it could really streamline and standardize, digitize various sort of sources of data, such that we get a better picture of where we are going, from an ESG. All of these eventually will lead to investor confidence, right? And I think there are a number of financial services and fintech firms who are already looking to sort of solve this problem, which is fantastic. These solutions will come before regulation. That's absolutely fine. But yes, if regulation catches up, it will promote it further.
And I'm so glad you mentioned investments, because I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Now, an EY report says that 90% of international investors look for a company's ESG performance before putting money into it. What are your observations about this, and how is this changing the overall business landscape?
Yeah, look, businesses are driven by investors, by consumers, and by the larger society, right? Every business produces something which is meant to serve a particular need. If the investor class is now going to say that this is a need, it's good, because then companies will find a way to ensure that it's integrated into their business models. So yeah, capital markets using ESG. I think a lot of the early ESG work and these sort of the development of the ESG concept really came from the investor class. It was them sort of saying that, okay, environment, social, and governance is important to us. How it's not just what you do, but how you do it. It was them who started to articulate, really coming from the civil society and consumers as well, but they were the ones who articulated it in that format. So the fact that investors are looking at non-financial elements is fantastic. I would think it's fantastic, because it places in front of business why these issues are important, right? Because the business as an animal responds well to incentives. And in a certain sense, this is becoming an incentive to those of us who get it right, right? And,
Absolutely, yeah.
And businesses, I'm sorry, just wrap that up. Businesses also, having to become more value driven, right? So they need to look at beyond the profit and the profit and loss, and look at some of these values and what they are doing in terms of their impact on the broader society. And if there is an incentive being created for those that are doing it well, why not? I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said it's an incentive, when investors look for that kind of ESG work. But what about consumers? Do you think that they are rapidly preferring ESG compliant companies?
At a headline level, yes. At a headline level, I think all of us, and you and I are consumers as well, as much as, sort of me working for a manufacturing company and whatever. And, at a broad level, all of us now tend to realize as consumers the waste that is created by our consumption, reduction in that, or the fact that we understand, the impact that buying fast fashion has, or the impact that food wastage has, or how we deal with our everyday waste, and I think that's become a part of our everyday lives. Right? So, to a certain extent, if that's who we are becoming as people, we want to know that the companies that we are buying from are also embodying those values, right? And I think so at a headline level, absolutely. But I think all consumers sit at different points of the spectrum, right? So sometimes companies need to sort of tell consumers that, look, this is a better option, or there's a premium paid because of this reason, or here's what we are doing and we don't expect anything to happen from it from a consumer perspective, but we are really proud of it because it has made an impact to the environment. And I think so, again, I'm going back to my idea of sort of a symbiotic relationship, right? So sometimes consumers need to be taken along on that journey, and I think innovation is going to be a big part of it, because yes, consumers do like value for money. And often certain choices are made because a certain product provides more value for money. But could there be a world where there is a product which provides the value for money in terms of what the quality that the consumer gets from it, but is also, meeting all the tick marks on the ESG? I think that would be fantastic, and that's where businesses need to start thinking of. I just want to sort of use this question as to talk a little bit about the company I work for, which is Pernod Ricard, which is one of the world's leading alcohol. And I think you already must have said that in my introduction, so I don't need to repeat that. But one of the things that we did was we took a decision to remove the permanent mono cartons, which is the outer covering on our product, on our bottles. So we took a decision to remove 100% of these permanent mono cartons, right? And why did we do that? Because we wanted to eliminate the contribution to landfills that comes from monocartons. These are single-use monocartons. You take out the bottle, it ends up in waste, and it makes its way to landfills. And our landfills, as we all know, are growing and could pose a bigger and bigger problem if we do not do enough about eliminating waste. And that was one of the biggest reasons why we did that. But there were other benefits as well. We were able to reduce packaging emissions by over 75,000 tons. That's what we'll end up doing by 2030. We also have managed to save 2.5 lakh of trees every year. So 2.5 lakhs of trees every year just by removing our monocartons. And we've managed to achieve better water footprint because there's water used in making these monocartons. Now, this is all fantastic, I'm really proud of it, and I'm really proud of the company and how the entire company, whether it was operations, commercial, or marketing, came together to deliver on this. But I had to tell my consumer, I had to explain to my consumer that that product that you were used to seeing in a particular way now looks different. And that's in a dark market, that's one of the relationships that our product has with the consumer. It's the packaging. And suddenly the packaging was not there. And we had to tell the consumer that, look, it's the same quality, but it's more sustainable like this. It wasn't a simple, let's get it off and put it on the racks and be done with it. We had to work towards educating the consumer as well as to why we had done it and why the product retains its quality. So I suppose, in this case, were the consumers asking us to remove the packaging? No. But when we did it, we set in motion an industry-wide practice. And I'm really proud of that, we started it, but others followed. So in a certain sense, we maybe took the consumer further than where they were at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not always a question of seeing a demand and responding to it. It's also a question of you moving the needle yourself, which is really what you're talking about. And the other thing, a point that I wanted to make was that the whole point about being value driven or being value for money, I think the definition of value probably is also changing, where I may not necessarily want something more out of the product, but I want the product to be made right and marketed right, just as you are describing. Which brings me to the other question, the other side rather. And just as we have greenwashing, there have been charges of ESG washing. Now, how prevalent is this, and what can regulators do about it?
Yeah, I think, we spoke a little bit about it earlier. Yes, it is a bit of a risk, right? I think, especially in early stages, I don't think companies start out with a view to do either greenwashing or ESG washing. I think everybody's intent is noble. It's important. I'm not saying that everybody is a bit of an angel walking on the earth, but yes, everybody's intent is good. There are certain risks attached to it, which need to be watched out, which need to be watched out for. There has to be a really strong governance process, even when one is putting out, initiatives on environment, social, and on governance should be strong. It's a different issue altogether. There should be clear communication channels between investors and the people who are doing this. There should be, as we spoke about earlier, standardized ESG framework. I think that goes a long way. A lot of this is about reporting. A lot of this is about good data. And if there is good data, which allows people to evaluate, a lot of this criticism will come down. The notifications from SEBI for disclosures and reporting is I think it's a welcome move. There are many companies, even ours, which already follows the GRI reporting format. Although we don't need to, we're not listed in India, but we do that. And that's almost to get ready for the future and making sure that we have that framework in place. So all of those things, strong regulatory framework, standardization of the ESG framework, following the disclosure and reporting formats, perhaps taking them on even when not required by regulators. Look out for risks. Make sure that you're talking about it. Review your green investments. Ensure that they are still delivering the outcomes that you were looking at. Get better at data. I think that's looking at what are the impacts and reporting on that. All that's needed, right? And I think if companies display that along with a strong intent, some of this should be eased out. And look, it also keeps companies on their toes, right? So if there is a discussion that there should not be greenwashing, that's good. Yeah, there's nobody's intent to be doing greenwashing. But if it places us on our toes, fantastic. We'll watch out more closely.
I actually wanted to double click on the reporting bit already. I know you've spoken about it in parts throughout the conversation, because I just believe that implementing ESG is one part of the effort, but reporting is actually really critical too. Now, how have Indian companies strengthened that aspect of their operations?
So the forward-looking organizations started reporting their ESG performances, on the globally accredited frameworks. There is GRI, TCFD, IR. And, as I said, there are even unlisted companies voluntarily disclose their ESG exercises based on this, what is called BRSR light format, right? So to a certain degree, because it is so external driven, right? As we said at the start of our conversation, because ESG is so external driven, companies realized very early on that simply doing it and saying it's been done will not be sufficient, right? So all these formats which are available, which enable companies, to report in a manner that data is readily readable, let's say, by those that are interested. That is available, and there are companies who are doing it. I think they are even those that are starting out on their journey are often using these frameworks and formats to plan some of their actions. which is not a bad thing, right? So if there is a format that you already know that this is how reporting is needed, and if you're backworking some of your initiatives to ensure that you can report on them, that's fantastic. So sometimes these frameworks are also being used for tactical purposes to plan the interventions. I think businesses should mine and record ESG-driven risks and opportunities. It allows for transparency. We just spoke about ESG washing. I think when you are driven by data and using these formats and putting it out there, any accidental ESG washing is also avoided, right? Because it enables internal systems as well to to review, to audit, and it sort of places you at the global best practices. So if you're looking at some of these frameworks, you're complying with global disclosure guidelines. And so I think that's fantastic for Indian companies because it's automatically putting you out there with the best in class. As far as reporting frameworks go, is what I wanted to add.
Yeah. And which sectors, Yashika, do you think have done well on the ESG front, and which sectors do you think have some catching up to do?
So, I just spoke about BRSR, which I should have given the full form for, the business responsibility and sustainability reporting. It is mandatory for the top 1,000 corporates, right? So, so the top 1,000 corporates have to incorporate ESG in their evaluation and report it in this format. So, if that is the criteria, then yes, these top 1,000 corporates will be required to showcase, to build that up across sectors. This would be across sectors, right? And it is, also to a certain degree, the top 1,000 corporates will also be driven by the UN SDGs. And therefore, you'll find that, ESG and SDG will come together, and they will be sort of focusing on delivering to their ESG commitments. As far as, which sectors, it's a little difficult for me to sort of answer that quite in terms of sector aspect, because I think it's quite diffused. And to a certain degree, it is driven by the size matters, and it is being driven by the top 1,000 corporates, like I said, because they're required to do that. There are others who are non-listed who are doing fantastic work. I know of a few companies who are looking to build solutions around around solving some of the issues that we face on climate issues or on environmental issues. And they are small startup companies, but they are doing a fantastic job of driving those solutions, which I think is great, because then you have the models available that can be picked up by even the non-listed companies. We ourselves are doing a lot of work around environmental and social, and we are not listed in India, so we don't come into that thing, but we are doing a fair amount of work. I think the alcobev sector certainly is out there, FMCG, the auto sector. All of them are sort of out there and taking advantage of the ESG, and even banks. It's not just us, but even the service economy. So we think of sort of manufacturing and that, but also the service economy. There is definitely sort of focus on getting that right.
And how do you think the ESG landscape will pan out over the next decade in India?
We spoke about the opportunity that it represents, right? We also spoke about, from a regulatory perspective, that much of it is becoming it's becoming mandatory from a reporting perspective. And all of that bodes well. We spoke about a few challenges on the regulatory side. But overall, I think it is going to be the solution to many of the developmental problems that we face as a country, right? And I think business in general is very good at identifying problems and creating solutions. So apart from the fact that there's an investment opportunity, there is regulatory requirements, there is even CSR, which was where we started from. Even CSR is mandatory under the Companies Act. So that's from the push side, right? The pull side is that all of these issues that we see as whether they're under environment, social, they will need solutions, and it will have to be businesses that come forward to find solutions. And that's where a lot of my sort of positivity comes from, where I see that yes, that will be the pull factor towards getting this right. There are barriers. We spoke about the regulatory barriers. There are infrastructure continues to be an area of development for us. And why that's important when we talk about ESG is because recycling and composting requires those technical skills, requires adequate infrastructure, right? Because when it's not available, it's when it cannot happen. And then if that doesn't happen, then we contribute to the problem versus the solution. There are high costs. If you want to put in place sustainable practices, whether you want to shift from the source of energy, right? That's one of the sort of sustainable practices that companies need to do. They need to shift to a renewable source of energy. That can bring certain costs, and also the infrastructure needs to be available. Sustainable materials. As much as I was positive that businesses will come in and find solutions over the short term, in our case, for example, let's say organic grains, recycled packaging material, all of this is needed. So we do need access to these sustainable materials. It is not at scale, not at the scale that that allows us to move faster. So this could be a challenge. Particularly in my sector, I'm talking now from the alcobev sector. The supply chain continues to be very complex. If a supply chain is very complex, then to drive sustainable outcomes becomes challenging. And it's also difficult to monitor, right? We spoke about all the data that we were talking about and the data that needs to be done. And of course, consumers need to keep pushing us, right? So consumer awareness. So I have just listed out all the various issues that I think will need to be sorted out, but I generally remain positive. Right? When the regulatory framework, when the technological innovation, and when industry collaboration takes place, and when the consumer gets out there, I think that will all push us in that direction where the future looks interesting. It looks like it's full of opportunities, and there is money to be had for those opportunities.
Now, Yashika, a lot of these conversations tend to happen around the larger corporations. But what about MSMEs? How can they contribute to the ESG push without putting too much pressure on their businesses?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we were just talking about the top 1,000 corporates being required to sort of report, and therefore saying that they would be definitely at the forefront of doing this. But look, my own view is that environmentally sound practices or socially sound practices, can be built at every size of business. Right? There could be sort of the big changes, the big front runners on driving the kind of changes that we were talking about in your previous question as to what is the future, may really come from the large companies, right? But that's not to say that these are not scalable. That sound environmental practices, sound social practices, good governance structures are definitely scalable. There is a certain role that large companies have because many of the MSMEs may be suppliers or vendors to the large companies, and there could be a trickling down of practices, and that large companies could work with smaller companies to get some of this in place, ensure that the practices are being shared, technical knowledge is being shared, better ways of doing things are being shared, and there's a system of reward as well, reward and punishment as well in place that can be sort of played out across the vendor-supplier spectrum. But my first point holds true. It is scalable, right? And also to support green projects, the main financing institution for MSMEs, which is SIDBI, they have launched a green finance scheme. So it is there is what sort of investment available for water management efficiency, wastewater treatment, carbon capture, environment protection, green building. For all of this, there is sort of financing available. But yes, it does mean that, there has to be an understanding of why this needs to be done, which I think will be driven by regulations, by larger companies, by consumers, which could be driving this. So all of this should allow for MSMEs to take on some of these practices as well. I don't think it's impossible yes, everybody has their place in how this ecosystem will be driven. But there is opportunity, there is financing available, and even there's this the government scheme on zero defect, zero effect is the catchy word for it, which is again looking at doing this. It's sort of incentivizing the zero effect part is incentivizing sustainable production. So there is enough at play to get MSMEs moving down that path as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to come back to Pernod Ricard, and you've mentioned in great detail about what your company has already done. Is there anything else that is doing on this front?
Yes, I think. Thanks for giving me that opportunity to talk about this. We are definitely a sustainability focused organization, and we are looking at addressing wastewater concerns, renewable electricity. We do have net zero carbon neutral goals, etc. We have in place a sustainability and responsibility roadmap, which goes out to 2030, which is aligned with the SDGs, which I think is a very good way of sort of planning, such that we're all working towards one common goal. And through that roadmap, one of the things that we like to do under that roadmap is that we like to sort of look at our impact from grain to glass. Right. So right from the moment that we procure our raw materials, and it's not immediately obvious to many people that our raw material comes from agriculture. It comes from the ground. So I think, therefore, our first point of contact is really the terroir, as we call it, right? The ground from which our grains grow, all our grapes grow, and which is what is used to make many of our products. So the first sort of area that we look at is we have a huge commitment towards nurturing the terroir. So each one of our products, it takes its character from the land from where it's grown. And therefore, conserving biodiversity, responding to challenges of climate change, to ensure quality ingredients, right? That's what we definitely look at doing. That we look at doing regenerative agriculture in India. We have got various programs that work with farmers to drive regenerative agriculture, better practices from that perspective. Also talking about forms of irrigation, we do all of that. The second part of the value chain from grain to glass is really when we get into the manufacturing. So working towards preserving circular manufacturing. I already spoke a little bit about this, but just to sort of put it into one nice little package. This is our sort of understanding that resources are scarce and resources are shared. And so when we put in place circular manufacturing, which I think most manufacturing companies are now looking at, we are committed to minimizing waste at every step, right? So we sort of look at producing in a manner and distributing our products in ways that really optimize and help preserve natural resources, right? Whether it's packaging, I spoke about our packaging already, and whether, making more sustainable packaging, circularity in packaging, where it's possible to reuse or recycle, we would do that. Water is another area for us, which is a scarce resource, and we work towards ensuring that we are reducing wastage of water, and where possible, reuse or reduce, reuse, but also replenish where possible. And in India, for example, we are water positive. As a company, we are water positive in India, which is a fantastic achievement for us. The other area, the social part of it, which sits under the pillar of people for us. We see ourselves as creators of conviviality. As a company, we say that we are creators of conviviality. So every time you're having a convivial moment with friends and family, we'll be in the mix. And therefore, people become very important to us, right? Our business is dependent on people. And that's really the S of our business. So we work with, vendors, suppliers, consumers, customers, communities around our producing, our manufacturing footprint. All of that, the work that we do with self-help groups, with farmers, with villagers, really fits into that bucket for us. And finally, we also are responsible hosts, and we work towards reducing the harm from the misuse of our product. So if there is, we work towards having various programs around responsible drinking, because we think responsible drinking is the only way to drink. And there's a fair amount of work that we do with governments and with policymakers, and otherwise as well, as an industry association, to drive the message of responsible drinking and to enable that behavior. through various initiatives. So that's all what we are doing around the sustainability and responsibility as a company.
So, Yashika, that brings me to the question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
What a fantastic question. Because I think there are two parts to it, right? There is the personal and my day job, right? I don't think there's any other way of being. How else do you do this? As once you've sort of accepted the idea that every aspect of us is shared. Whatever products that we use is not ours to take, but ours to ask for. It's a privilege. Then what else? I don't know of any other way of doing this. Businesses need to be sustainable. And I'm not talking about environment, but businesses need to remain sustainable and continue to do what they do for a very long period of time, because businesses create economic activity, which creates livelihood, which creates people's ability to earn a wage, contribute to the society, etc. So if that is the reason why businesses exist, right? They exist to produce goods, but they also do this. Then they need to be sustainable and be something that is future proof. And if that's what we accept, then what else is there to do but to create a world which allows us to exist for a long period of time? And that world can only be created if we are doing this. It is pretty selfish, and it should be selfish. It is selfish towards ensuring that our businesses keep running and survive and thrive for years to come. But there is no way that businesses can thrive and survive and continue to drive value if we are not thinking like this. If we are not sort of thinking of the larger world, if we are not creating an environmentally sound, a socially sound, and strong governance-driven businesses. Our corporate social responsibility vision is leaving no one behind. And how do you do that? It's our stakeholders, the stakeholders that companies face today. At one time, it was, just the board, and then there were investors, and then there was civil society, and then there was communities. And I don't think businesses can survive by simply saying my only stakeholder is where the money is coming from. It's no longer possible. So it is driven by a very selfish need of existence in the future. So we like to believe that there can be no conviviality with excess. How do you remain convivial if you're not sharing the responsibility? So yeah, that's why we do it. That's why I do it.
Yashika, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope it was apparent that this is a personal passion as much as it's a day job. I really hope that this has given me an opportunity to talk about the company that I work for. And I'm hoping that it will encourage people to go and look up the work that we do. I've not been able to sort of talk about everything. I really hope it will encourage people to go and look up what we do and see the wonderful work that's happening and the lives that are to be touched. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.